Welcome to History Mystery Monday. Today we are going to be talking about a sword that is considered one of the most perfect blades ever made in Japan. Created by legendary swordmaker Goro Masamune sometime around the 13th century, it survived 700 years of warfare, upheaval, and transitions of power. It was declared a national treasure in 1939. Then how was it lost so recently to history? Before we dive into today's mystery, don't forget to like, subscribe, and be notified. Before we talk about the legendary Honjo Masamune sword, let's start with some background on the legendary swordmaker who created it. His name was Goro Masamune. The dates when he created his swords aren't 100% known. Details of his life given don't always line up. Some say he was born around 1264 in Kanagawa Prefecture, and that as a young man he studied under the swordsmith Shintogo Kunimitsu, the founder of the Soshu style of swordmaking. But the oldest date of Kunimitsu's work is 1293. So if by 1287, at the age of 23, Masamune was already appointed the official swordmaker of the emperor, as some claim, then the dates simply do not match up. It is far easier to say that much of his life is the stuff of legends, whose true details are lost to time. Although the official site for the descendant of Masamune, who is still working today, has this to say. Back some 700 years ago, Regent Honjo called swordsmiths from across the country to the city of Kamakura, then the seat of the shogunate, to set the standards for Kamakura's swordsmiths. Goro Masamune, the founder of the Soshu tradition, was the son of the swordsmith Yukimitsu from Awaraguchi, Kyoto. He worked with the traditional standard of sword-making styles of the time and improved upon them, leading to the start of the distinctive Soshu style. He is credited with inventing a stress relief process known today as thermocycling, which is a rapid heating and cooling of the steel in a series of steps during forging, and that his blades composed of over 30,000 layers. It is also generally agreed that Masamune's technique was ahead of its time throughout the world. He tempered swords to a much higher temperature than anyone had before him. This process resulted in finished swords that shined with a vivid amon, or hamon line, as some will call it, a visible effect created on the blade by the hardening process. In layman's terms, that little wavy line you sometimes see along the blade of swords. It had brilliant nie, which is the crystallization patterns that form in the steel. It was said the beauty of his amon and nie was said to resemble stars in the night sky. His blades are the most frequently cited among those listed in the Kyoho Meibutsucho, a catalog of the greatest swords of famous daimyo, which was created on the orders of Tokugawa Yoshimune of the Tokugawa shogunate in 1714 by the Honami family of sword appraisers and polishers, and lists 41 blades by Masamune. There is a legend oft quoted of a matchup between Masamune and a rival swordmaker, Muramasa. But being that the two men lived almost a century apart, it is truly the stuff of legends. Others say that the matchup was between Masamune and a prideful student who felt he had surpassed his master, which would make more sense, but not be quite as epic. Now that you have a bit of background on the maker who made the sword, the Honjo Masamune itself first enters recorded history 300 years after it was made, when it received its name. It is unknown who the sword was originally made for, or its history up to 1561. It is named after Honjo Shigenaga, a general who lived during the 16th century and served the Uesugi clan in northern Japan. Shigenaga came into possession of the sword after the Fourth Battle of Kawanakajima in 1561. An enemy general, whose name does not seem to have survived, owned the sword at the time, and during the battle he challenged Shigenaga to a duel. During the duel, Shigenaga's enemy succeeded in cleaving the samurai's helmet in half, but he survived what could surely have been a deadly blow, and in the end emerged victorious, and claimed his enemy's sword as a prize. Shigenaga kept the sword for many years before selling it to the Toyotomi clan around the end of the 16th century for 13 large gold coins. The Toyotomi clan were, at the time, the rulers of Japan. After the fall of the Toyotomi clan, the sword was acquired by Japan's new shogun, Tokugawa Ieyasu. It then became a family treasure and the symbol of the Tokugawa dynasty. Hence, the Honjo Masamune was passed down from one shogun to the next. Even after the fall of the Tokugawa shogunate in 1868 and the Meiji Restoration, the sword remained within the family's possession till the end of World War II. When Japan surrendered, the Allied forces demanded that all Japanese noble families hand over their collection of swords. However, many collectors and museum curators protested this assault on Japanese heritage. A representative of the Tokyo Museum met Military Police Commander Victor C. Cadwell of the U.S. 8th Army, the officer in charge of weapons collection. They explained that some swords were ancient works of an almost forgotten art, like the cathedrals of the West, a vivid symbol that was an extension of the samurai himself, influencing Japanese art and literature. They were not military weapons. They were treasures. They succeeded in convincing Colonel Cadwell that there were Japanese swords that were not simply wartime weapons and should no longer be treated as such. SCAP Instruction 12 tried to clarify the situation by letting treasured heirlooms stay with their owners. But unfortunately, Cadwell did not have the final word, and all swords stayed listed for seizure. At that time, Tokugawa Ieyasu, the head of the family, wanted to set a good example of cooperation and handed over his family's collection of swords. 15 swords in all, bundled all together. The Honjo Masamune was among them. He delivered them to the Mejido police station in December of 1945. And this is where the true mystery begins. On January 18, 1946, the entire collection of Tokugawa swords were handed over to a sergeant from the 7th Cavalry Regiment. His name was Coldy Beemore. It took till August 1966 in the then newest edition of Saga, an American magazine, for any of this information to come to light. It contained an article listing 14 swords, including the Honjo Masamune, that went missing after the war. It was in this article that the name Coldy Beemore of the 7th U.S. Cavalry first entered history. It is true that the 7th Cavalry patrols were in Tokyo and did make inventories of arsenals, factories, barracks, and storage depots. They also disposed of munitions and conducted patrols in search of hidden Japanese weapons, including swords. After the war, all over Japan, collected swords were stored in warehouses before being dumped at sea or melted down for scrap. In Tokyo, storage would have been at the Akabane depot. To avoid the destruction of important cultural swords, every blade at Akabane was scrutinized by an inspection committee, and nearly 5,000 swords were identified as important cultural artifacts and returned to their owners. But the Honjo Masamune was not among them. Unfortunately, there are no surviving police records for that period, but there is another source, the Japanese Department of Education. Their records at the time make it clear that the Honjo Masamune certainly was taken from the Mejido police station by a Sergeant Beemore. Now, at the time, the American Army operated a pretty open war trophy system. A GI who had taken part in the Pacific War could, with the correct permissions, take home one enemy gun and one sword as personal souvenirs. Most of these would have been mass-produced military swords, but some GIs unknowingly had a hold of works of art of great cultural value. It's very possible that the Honjo Masamune was taken by Coldy Beemore as his personal memento. He may have even known that the swords were from the Tokugawa clan, and therefore likely of great value. But there remains a problem. The records of the 7th Cavalry should reveal when this Sergeant Coldy B. Moore left Japan, when he arrived home, but the 7th Cavalry Veterans Association lists no one by that name. Now, the Saga magazine article does describe that the name Coldy B. Moore is a phonetic writing. This indicated it's an interpretation from English into Japanese. The strange name may be inaccurate. However, all attempts to line up a serving member of military to any kind of similar name have been unsuccessful, so it remains possible that he used a fake name. How would the sword be identified, if it still exists at all? It is said to be about 25.6 inches long and have a curvature of 0.6 inches. It likely will not have a signature on it, as Masamune was known to be a modest man, and as a general rule did not sign his blades. But there would be a definitive answer. Remember, in 1939, the Honjo Masamune was declared a national treasure. In such, fine detailed drawings of the amon were made. Like a fingerprint, there could be no mistaking it. While there is currently no indication of the location of the sword, if it were found, it would certainly be one of the most important finds of the 21st century. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you again on another History Mystery Monday.